She had hired 7 piano teachers. Sophie had driven every single one of them out. But on a cold November evening at the most prestigious charity gala in the city, Elowen Hart, billionaire, CEO, and mother who could buy anything except her daughter's trust, watched something happen that no amount of money had ever produced. Her 8-year-old daughter walked across a crowded ballroom toward a complete stranger, sat down beside him, and said 4 words that would quietly unravel both their lives. "Will you teach me?" What Elowen didn't know yet was who that man really was, and what was already coming for all of them. Doll, if this story already has you subscribed to the channel right now so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop a comment below telling me the city and country where you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Bellwether Grand was the kind of hotel that made people feel smaller than they actually were. That was, Elowen Hart had always thought, rather the point. The ceilings in the ballroom climbed 4 stories, all white plasterwork and gilded molding, with chandeliers that threw warm amber light across 500 people who had paid $10,000 a plate to stand in the same room and feel important. The charity was legitimate, a children's literacy foundation, with a solid board and audited books, but the real business of the evening happened the way it always did, in the margins. In the handshakes between courses. In the quiet conversations near the bar, where deals were not signed but simply agreed upon, and the paperwork followed later as a formality. Elowen knew how it worked because she had been working it since she was 24 years old, back when Hart Systems was 3 employees and a leased server room in a building that smelled like mildew and takeout containers. Now she was 30, and Hart Systems protected the digital infrastructure of 11 Fortune 500 companies, 2 federal agencies, and a hospital network spanning 4 states. Forbes had put her face on a cover 6 months ago. The headline had called her the Quiet Fortress. Her publicist had loved it. Elowen had found it mildly irritating, mostly because it suggested she had walls, which was true, but not something she particularly wanted published. She was standing near the east window with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, listening to a venture capitalist named Gerald Fossey explain his thoughts on AI regulation. Gerald had strong thoughts. Gerald always had strong thoughts. Elowen nodded at intervals and watched the room with the other half of her attention, the way she always did at these events, cataloging exits, reading body language, tracking which conversations had shifted in energy and might need her presence or her absence. She was also watching Sophie. Her daughter stood 12 feet away, next to the table where Elowen had parked her for the evening, with a plate of appetizers and a tablet loaded with 3 approved games. Sophie was 8 years old, small for her age, with Elowen's dark hair and a stubborn set to her jaw that she had not inherited from anyone Elowen could identify. Sophie had been born with opinions. She had been born, it sometimes seemed, with a fully developed interior life that she shared with approximately nobody. The tablet sat untouched on the table. Sophie was staring at something across the ballroom. Elowen tracked her daughter's line of sight and found, in a recessed alcove near the northern wall, partially hidden by a large floral arrangement and a folding screen that someone had positioned to create a quiet buffer from the noise of the main floor, a piano. A Steinway concert grand, lacquered black, which the hotel had presumably placed there for the evening's entertainment portion of the program. A man was sitting at it. He wasn't part of the entertainment. That much was clear. He was dressed for the gala dark suit, no tie, collar open 1 button, but he wasn't performing. He was playing quietly, almost privately, in a way that suggested he had found the piano, the way a person finds a quiet corner at a party when they need 5 minutes away from everything. Sitting beside him on the bench, pressed against his arm, was a small boy in a clip-on tie who appeared to be about 7 years old and completely absorbed in watching his father's hands move across the keys. Elowen couldn't identify the piece. It wasn't classical in the formal sense, not Chopin, not Beethoven. It was something slower, more searching, built from a simple melody that repeated and varied and repeated again. Kind of music that didn't announce itself. The kind that you noticed, when you noticed it at all, because something in you had already started listening before your brain caught up. She looked back at Sophie. Sophie had gotten up from her chair. "Excuse me a moment," Elowen said to Gerald, who did not stop talking. She moved through the crowd, keeping Sophie in her periphery, not wanting to spook her. Sophie had a particular response to feeling watched. She would stop whatever she was doing and retreat into herself like something shelled, and whatever small impulse had briefly opened her up would close again and be very difficult to reopen. Elowen had learned this the hard way, repeatedly over 8 years. Sophie crossed the floor in the unhurried, deliberate way she did everything. She wasn't sneaking. She wasn't uncertain. She was just walking toward something she had decided she wanted, with the quiet confidence of a child who had never particularly cared what anyone thought of her approach. She passed 2 waiters and a woman in a silver dress without looking at any of them. She stopped at the edge of the alcove. The man at the piano didn't notice her immediately. He was focused on the keys, or maybe on the boy beside him, who had now started picking out a single-note pattern with one finger while his father played around it, incorporating whatever the boy played into the melody as if it had always belonged there. Sophie watched this for a moment. Then she said, clearly enough that Elowen could hear it from where she stood, "Will you teach me to play like that?" The man stopped. He turned to look at her. He had a still kind of face, not unfriendly, but not immediately readable either. Dark hair that needed cutting. A scar along the left side of his jaw that was old enough to have faded to a thin white line. He looked at Sophie the way adults who were good with children looked at them, directly, without the performance of enthusiasm, without adjusting his expression into something warmer than he actually felt. "Like what?" he said. "Like you were just playing," Sophie said. "Where it sounds like something, but you can't tell what it is yet." He considered this. The boy beside him, his son, clearly was looking at Sophie with frank curiosity, not yet at the age where he tried to hide his interest in new people. "Called improvisation," the man said. "I know what it's called," Sophie said. "I've had teachers. They didn't do it like that." "How did they do it?" Sophie made a small gesture that managed to convey, with remarkable economy, the entire experience of being taught by someone who was technically competent and spiritually absent. "They had a plan," she said. "They always had a plan." Something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite a smile, but close to one.
"My name's Sophie," she said.
"Ronan," he said. He nodded toward the boy. "This is Milo." Milo waved. Sophie looked at him. "Hi," she said, with the careful neutrality she extended to most people until she had decided what to make of them. Elowen stood at the edge of this and felt something she could not have named clearly. Something between wonder and a particular kind of grief, the grief of watching your child do something easily with a stranger that she has never been able to do with anyone you have tried to give her. She stayed where she was. She didn't intervene. It was the right call. Ronan shifted slightly on the bench, creating space without making a production of it. "Sit down," he said. "I'll show you the bass pattern." Sophie sat. She sat down at a Steinway concert grand in the middle of a charity gala at the Bellwether Grand, next to a man she had met 45 seconds ago, with Milo watching from the other side, and she put her hands on the keys. Ronan placed 2 fingers over hers, very briefly, just long enough to show her the position. Then he took his hands away and played 3 notes. He waited. Sophie played them back, not perfectly, but close. "Again," he said. She played them again. Better. Elowen watched her daughter's face. Sophie was not smiling. She rarely smiled during things she was concentrating on. But there was something in her expression that Elowen recognized and almost never saw anymore, the look of a person who is entirely present, not performing, not protecting herself. Just there. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her head of security. "Run a quiet background on Ronan Cade. No flag, just preliminary." Then she put the phone away and went back to Gerald Foss, who had not noticed she had been gone. The gala's formal program began at 9. There were speeches, a live auction, a string quartet. Elowen sat at her table with 3 board members and a senator's chief of staff and said the right things in the right order. Sophie sat beside her, unusually quiet, eating the dessert that had been placed in front of her with the focused attention she normally reserved for things she was actively thinking about. At 9:40, an older man in a navy dress uniform made his way across the room. He was moving with purpose, scanning the crowd, and he was looking for someone. Elowen tracked him out of habit. He stopped at a table near the northern wall. Ronan Cade stood when he saw the man approach, and there was something in the way he stood, not the lazy politeness of a man greeting an acquaintance, but a different kind of rising, something that came from the spine that made Elowen set down her glass. "Cade," the older man said, loud enough to carry, "I'll be damned. I heard you were in the city." "Didn't believe it, Admiral," Ronan said. His voice was neutral, careful. "Still fixing boats?" There was something in the Admiral's tone, not contempt, exactly, but the specific register of someone who found a situation they considered to be a waste. "Yes, sir. Your unit asks about you. The people who are still around to ask. I know. 4 years is a long time to disappear. It is, Ronan said. It was the right call. The Admiral looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Milo, who was sitting at the table eating a roll and paying no attention to any of this, and something in the older man's face shifted just slightly. He put a hand briefly on Ronan's shoulder, said something too low to carry. Ronan nodded once. Then the Admiral moved on. Elowen became aware, in the way she became aware of most things, gradually and then completely, that she had been holding herself very still. She looked down at her phone. The preliminary report her security team had pulled was already waiting. She opened it. Ronan James Cade, 32. No criminal record. No civil judgments. Current employment. Maritime repair. Self-employed. Operating out of Millhaven Boat Works. Prior to civilian life, United States Navy Special Operations Community. Service record redacted above pay grade request, full clearance for additional detail. Separated from service 4 years ago. Nature of separation. Not standard retirement, not disciplinary marked as voluntary. Administrative notation sealed. One dependent, Milo Thomas Cade, age 7. Mother deceased 18 months ago. Elowen read this 3 times. Then she closed her phone and looked across the ballroom at the man who repaired boats for a living and played piano in quiet corners and had somehow, in the space of 20 minutes, done what no hired professional had managed in 2 years. He was looking at Milo. He wasn't looking at her. She thought, I don't know what to make of you. She thought, but I'm going to find out. Sophie said very little in the car on the way home. This was normal. Sophie processed things internally and reported on them later, sometimes days later when she had come to whatever conclusion she was going to come to. Elowen didn't push. Their driver, a quiet man named Curtis who had been with them for 3 years, navigated the late-night streets while Sophie looked out the window and Elowen checked her email and to pretend she wasn't still thinking about a man in a dark suit playing a melody that didn't announce itself. Way home, Sophie said, I want him to teach me. We'll see, Elowen said. That's what you say when you mean no. That's what I say when I mean we'll see. Sophie looked at her. Sophie had a particular look, flat, patient, completely unimpressed that she had been deploying since she was at 4 years old, and which Elowen privately thought was the most honest face she had ever seen on a human being. He's not like the others, Sophie said. You spent 20 minutes with him. I know. Sophie turned back to the window. 20 minutes was enough. Elowen looked at her daughter's profile against the passing lights. 8 years old. Born 3 weeks early, into a life that had already been complicated, to a mother who was already running a company and trying to figure out how to do 2 things at once. Sophie had never been easy. She had never been soft-edged or simple or content with surface things. She noticed everything, trusted almost nothing, and she loved Elowen knew this, even when it was hard with an intensity that she had nowhere to put yet. I'll reach out to him, Elowen said. Sophie didn't say anything, but the set of her shoulders changed, very slightly, in a way that meant she had heard, and she was satisfied, and the matter was settled as far as she was concerned. Elowen turned back to her window. Outside, the city moved past in streaks of light and dark. She thought about a scar along a jaw. She thought about a sealed service record. She thought about a small boy in a clip-on tie pressing against his father's arm, watching hands move across keys, and about a man who played piano in the corner of a ballroom not to be seen, but because he needed to. She thought, 18 months since the boy's mother died. And he brought him to a gala, in a clip-on tie. She didn't know why that detail kept coming back to her. It was small, it was almost nothing, but she had built a company on the understanding that the details people didn't think anyone was noticing were usually the ones that told you the most. She looked at Sophie one more time. Her daughter had fallen asleep against the window, her breath fogging the glass faintly with each exhale. Even asleep, she had that small, stubborn set to her jaw. Elowen pulled up the contact information her assistant had already sourced and started composing a message. She wrote, Mr. Cade, my name is Elowen Hart. My daughter Sophie met you this evening at the Bellwether. I'd like to discuss a professional arrangement at your convenience. I believe you'll find the terms worth your time. She looked at the draft for a moment. Then she deleted the last sentence. It was the kind of thing she said to people she was trying to leverage. She didn't know yet what she was trying to do with this one. She sent Mr. Cade, my name is Elowen Hart. My daughter Sophie met you this evening at the Bellwether. I'd like to speak if you're open to it. She put the phone away. Curtis pulled through the gates of their building. The night doorman held the lobby open. Sophie woke up enough to walk, listing slightly, her hand finding Elowen's automatically in the way children do when they are not quite all the way conscious. Elowen held on. In the elevator, Sophie said, half asleep, not quite directed at anyone. Played like he meant it. The doors closed. Elowen looked straight ahead at her own reflection in the polished metal. She thought, yes, he did. And she could not decide, standing there with her half-asleep daughter's hand in hers, whether that was the thing that made him interesting or the thing that should make her careful. Probably she suspected it was both. Ronan didn't respond that night. He didn't respond the next morning either, which Elowen noted without particular surprise. She had sent the message at 11:43 p.m. from a moving car, and most people reasonable people who were not running on the particular kind of anxious fuel that kept her operational past midnight, were asleep by then. She told herself this and went about her morning a 6A. Call with the Singapore office, a review of the quarterly security audit her team had flagged for her attention, a breakfast with Sophie that lasted 11 minutes, before Sophie took her toast to her room and closed the door with the specific quietness that meant she wanted to be left alone. At 8:57 a.m., her phone buzzed. "Miss Hart, I got your message. I'm not sure what arrangement you have in mind, but I'll hear you out. I work until 4 most days. Coffee after if that works." RC, no punctuation on the sign-off, no pleasantries. She found herself reading it twice, not because it was difficult to parse, but because she was trying to figure out the tone, and the tone was stubbornly, just neutral, not impressed, not dismissive. Simply a man who had decided to have a conversation and was scheduling it accordingly. She wrote back 4:30, "I'll come to you." Where? He sent an address. It turned out to be a diner 3 blocks from the waterfront, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that arrived without being asked for. She looked it up on the map. She looked up Millhaven Boatworks, too, which was half a mile from the diner, and had a website that appeared to have been built sometime around 2019, and not updated since, with 3 photos of repaired hulls and a phone number. Told her assistant to clear her 4:30. The diner was called Patsy's, and it smelled like fryer oil and the particular warmth of a heating system that had been working hard since October. Ronan was already there when she arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee he was not drinking, looking at something on his phone that he put away when she walked in. He stood when she approached, not with the performance of a man who had been coached on professional courtesy, but with the automatic reflex of someone for whom standing was simply what you did. "Miss Hart," he said. "Elowen," she said, "please." He sat back down. She slid into the seat across from him. A waitress appeared and poured coffee without asking. And Elowen, who had not drunk diner coffee since a red-eye flight connection in 2019, wrapped her hands around the mug because the room was slightly cold near the windows. She looked at him in the daylight, which the gala had not given her much chance to do. He was more worn in natural light, not old, not haggard, just the particular kind of weathered that accumulates on a face that has spent years outdoors and in conditions that were not comfortable. His hands on the table were the hands of someone who worked with them, a healed split across one knuckle, calluses in the right places for tools rather than keyboards. He looked like what he was. She had met enough men who tried not to look like what they were that she found this, in a way she did not examine too closely, almost startling. "You looked me up," he said. It wasn't an accusation. "I did," she said. "I look everyone up. It's not personal." "What did you find?" "Service record mostly redacted. Self-employed. 1 dependent." She paused. "I'm sorry about Milo's mother." He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he had been offered condolences before and knew how to receive them without letting them land too hard. "Thank you," he said. "Sophie has been through 7 piano teachers," Elowen said, because she was not a woman who managed transitions gracefully when she was trying to get somewhere, and she had approximately 40 minutes before her next obligation. 7 in 2 years. She considered not an easy child to teach. She's not easy in general, honestly. She's very perceptive, and she doesn't respond to things she considers performed. Most instructors perform. The good intentions, the patience, the enthusiasm, she reads it as theater and she shuts down. Ronan said nothing. He was listening. "What happened at the gala," Elowen said, "was the first time she's voluntarily sat at a piano in 4 months. She picked up the coffee mug and set it down without drinking. I want to hire you to teach her." Ronan looked out the window at the street, where a truck was unloading something at the building across the way, and two men in work coats were arguing about the best angle of approach. He watched this for a few seconds. Then he looked back at her. "I'm not a piano teacher," he said. "You clearly know how to teach. I know how to play. Those are different things. I learned from my grandmother over about 12 years, and I've been doing it long enough that I can show Milo what I know. But that's not the same as," he gestured vaguely, "a curriculum. A method. Whatever it is professional teachers have." "Sophie doesn't respond to the curriculum," Elowen said. "Miss Hart Elowen." He paused. "I fix boats. I pick up Milo at 3:15. I cook dinner, I do the bath and bed routine, and then I sleep. That's the current operational capacity. There's not a lot of margin in it." "I'm not asking you to change your life," she said. "I'm asking for a few hours a week. I'll pay you," she named a number. He looked at her. His expression did not change in the way she expected expressions to change when she named that number. What she usually saw was a brief recalibration, sometimes involuntary, as people revised their understanding of what was being offered. What she saw on his face was something closer to discomfort. "That's too much," he said. "It's a fair rate for private instruction at that level." "It's not a fair rate," he said. "It's a rate someone pays when they want to make sure the answer is yes." Elowen set the mug down. She had not expected that response, which was she recognized this, even as she felt it her own fault for treating this like a standard negotiation. She sat back slightly. "You're right," she said, after a moment. "I'm not trying to insult you." "You're not. You're right." She thought about Sophie's face at the piano, about what 20 minutes with a stranger had produced that 2 years of hired expertise had not. "What would you need to consider it?" "I don't know," he said. "I'd need to think about whether I can actually give the kid what she needs. And that's not me being modest. I genuinely don't know if what I do is translatable to someone else. Piano for me is," he stopped. "Is what?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was the same even tone, but something underneath it had shifted slightly. "It's a place where I can put things that don't fit anywhere else," he said. "It's not a technique. I don't know if that's what a child needs." "Sophie told me last night that you play like you mean it," Elowen said. He looked at her. She was half asleep, Elowen added. She didn't know she was saying it out loud, I think. But she said it. She picked up the coffee this time and actually drank it. It was, objectively, not good coffee. It was also, in the specific atmosphere of this diner on this gray November afternoon, the right coffee. She's never said anything like that about any of the others. Ronan was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the waitress came back and refilled both their mugs without being asked, and Elowen resisted the urge to check her phone, because she knew somehow that checking her phone right now would be the wrong move. 1 month, he said finally. 2 sessions a week. Regular pay, I'll tell you what that is, which is not what you said. And at the end of the month, if Sophie wants to continue, and if I think I'm actually helping her, we talk about it again. That's fair, Elowen said. And if she decides she hates it after the second session, I'm done. And we don't have an awkward conversation about why. Also fair. He nodded, once like something had been agreed upon, and that was that. He picked up his coffee. Elowen said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Why did you leave?" He looked at her steadily. He knew what she meant. "Because it was time," he said. She waited. "Milo was 3 when his mother got sick," he said. "He was 5 when she died. He chose the words with care not present for as much of that as I should have been. I made the decision that I was going to be present for what came after, and that was incompatible with the life I was living." It was a clean answer. Accurate, Elowen thought, but curated. She did not push. "The service record," she said. "It's sealed above a certain level." "Yes." "You don't want to tell me about it?" "No." "Okay," she said. He looked at her like he had expected more resistance. "Okay?" "Okay," she said again. "Everybody has things they don't talk about." He considered her for a moment. "What don't you talk about?" "Sophie's father," she said, without hesitating, because she had been asked this in enough interviews and by enough well-intentioned people over enough years that she had made her peace with having a clean, true, non-elaborated answer ready. "He left when I was 3 months pregnant. We haven't spoken since. I don't discuss it publicly, and I don't discuss it with her yet, because she's 8, and what she needs right now is stability, not narrative." She paused. "There. Now we're even." Ronan looked at her for a beat. Then he said, "Not exactly even. You were asking about something specific." "Fair point," she said. Something close to a smile passed across his face. "Not quite, but close." The same not quite smile she had seen at the gala when Sophie said they always had a plan. She looked at that almost smile and thought, I should be more careful than I'm currently being. She was not at that moment very careful at all. The first session happened the following Saturday. In the music room on the 14th floor of Elowen's building, a space she had converted from a guest room when Sophie was 6, and briefly interested in violin, which had lasted approximately 2 months. The room had a window that looked over the river and a Yamaha upright that Elowen had bought new, and Sophie had, for the past several months, regarded with a kind of pointed indifference, the way children regard things that have become associated with disappointment. Ronan arrived at 10. He was not early, he was not late. Came with Milo, who was wearing a sweatshirt with a cartoon shark on it and carrying a small backpack from which he extracted, upon arrival, a paperback novel, a bag of pretzels, and a portable charger for a device he had apparently left at home, which he discovered immediately and announced to the room. That's okay, buddy, Ronan said. You've got the book. The book is boring, Milo said. You chose the book. I thought it was going to be better. Sophie, who had appeared in the hallway with the careful casualness she deployed when she was been trying to look like she didn't care about something she cared a great deal about, looked at Milo with what appeared to be surprised recognition of this situation. What's the book? She asked. Milo showed her the cover. That one gets better in the middle, Sophie said. First part is slow. Milo looked at the book, then at Sophie. How do you know? I read it. Did you like it? Sophie considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Parts of it, she said, finally, which was, Elowen knew, almost lavish praise from her daughter. Milo apparently accepted this assessment. He sat down on the couch with the pretzel bag and the book. Ronan looked at Sophie. Ready, he said. I've been ready, she said, which was such a Sophie thing to say that Elowen had to look away to avoid smiling. What Ronan did in that first session was not what Elowen had seen any instructor do with her daughter. He did not begin with scales. He did not talk about posture, although at one point he adjusted Sophie's elbow angle without commenting on it, just a brief physical correction, and moved on. He sat beside her on the bench and played the same small melody he had played at the gala, slowly and then slightly slower, and he asked her to watch his left hand. What's my left hand doing? He said. Sophie watched. Holding things down, she said, while the right one moves. Exactly. Left hand is the foundation. Right hand is the conversation. The conversation can go anywhere as long as the foundation stays steady. That's how it works in real life, too. Sophie said, not as a question, just an observation, delivered in the same tone she used for observable facts. Ronan looked at her. Yeah, he said, it is. They worked for 40 minutes. Sophie made mistakes, of course. She made mistakes. She had the basic mechanics, but none of the fluency. And when she made them, she made the particular face she made when she was angry at herself, the jaw tightening and the eyes going flat, the stillness before the withdrawal. The first time it happened, Ronan didn't say anything. He waited. Then, quietly, he played the section she had just attempted, at half speed, getting it wrong himself in the same place, then backing up and trying again. Sophie watched him. Again, he said, about himself, and played it again. This time clean, he looked at her. Your turn. She played it. Not clean, but closer. He nodded once, the way he had nodded when they'd reached their agreement at the diner, like a thing had been settled. The second time Sophie made a mistake and went still, Ronan said, stop. Take a breath. Here where you are. I know where I am. Okay. Then before you play it again, let yourself hear the mistake instead of just feeling it. There's a difference. Sophie was quiet for a moment. What's the difference? Feeling it is about you, he said. Hearing it is about the music. When it's about the music, you can fix it. When it's about you, you're just fighting yourself. Sophie looked at the keys for a moment. Then she played the section again. It was noticeably better. Elowen was sitting on the couch on the other side of the room, next to Milo, who had moved on from the book to the pretzels and was watching the session with the comfortable familiarity of a child who had seen this before, who knew the shape of how his father taught, even informally. She was watching her daughter with the particular attentiveness she reserved for moments she needed to remember exactly. She thought 2 years, 7 teachers, and this is the first time she hasn't quit. She thought, who are you? The month passed in a way that months rarely passed for Elowen, which was to say it passed with the quality of something she was actually inside, rather than managing from a slight distance. Ronan came on Tuesdays and Saturdays. He was reliable with a quietness about it, no announcements, no expectations of recognition for showing up. He simply showed up, the way people do when they have decided to do something and see no reason to make a performance of the deciding. Milo came most of the time, occasionally staying with a neighbor on the Tuesday sessions when Ronan's work ran late, but present for the Saturdays, settling into Sophie's apartment with the adaptability of a child who had learned to be comfortable in a variety of environments. The two children were a strange pairing. Sophie was precise and internal and serious, in a way that occasionally made adults uncomfortable. Milo was looser, more verbal, with a 7-year-old's tendency to announce his interior states without filtering them. He said things like, "This is boring and I'm hungry," and "Sophie, you're better at that than you were last time," with equal candor, as if these were all simply reportable facts. Sophie, to Elowen's continued surprise, did not find this irritating. She found it, apparently, legible. Milo said what he meant, and this was a quality Sophie valued above almost all others. By the second week, Sophie was showing Milo things on the piano. Not teaching she was too honest about her own limitations for that, but demonstrating the patterns Ronan had shown her, explaining them with an accuracy that suggested she had absorbed not just the mechanics, but the reasoning behind them. Milo listened with varying levels of attention, but occasionally tried the patterns himself, and once, on a Saturday afternoon in the third week, the three of them sat at the piano bench together, Ronan on one end, Milo in the middle, Sophie on the other, and played a simple piece in unison that was ragged and imperfect and completely alive. And Elowen stood in the doorway of the music room and felt something shift in the structure of her life, which she did not acknowledge to herself right away, because she was not yet ready to. Dinners happened. Not planned. Exactly the first one was the result of a session running long, and Elowen ordering food rather than letting people leave into rush hour traffic, and the second one happened because Sophie asked, with a directness that made both adults look at each other briefly, if Ronan and Milo could stay for dinner. After the third time, it stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like a pattern. They talked at those dinners, real conversation, the kind that happened between people who were finding they had more in common than they had expected and were not entirely sure what to do about that. They talked about the difficulty of making decisions for children when you were also making decisions for yourself, and about the specific exhaustion of being the only person responsible for another human being's well-being, and about the smaller things too, a book Elowen had read, a problem Ronan had solved at the boatyard that week, the movie that Milo insisted everyone needed to see immediately, and that turned out to be tolerable at best. Ronan was not easy to talk to in the way that some people were easy to talk to. He did not fill silences automatically or ask the social questions that kept conversations running on their surface. He listened carefully and responded to what was actually said, rather than to what he expected to hear, which was, Elowen had not realized, until encountering someone who did this, how rarely it happened, both disorienting and, after a while, something she found herself relying on. She was also with the part of herself that kept tracking, noticing the way he was with Sophie. He did not treat her daughter like a project or a problem. He did not offer Sophie the careful, managed warmth that most adults offered difficult children, the performance of patience that Sophie could read and dismiss in seconds. He treated her, essentially, like a person. He disagreed with her when she was wrong. He acknowledged when she was right. Called her out once when she was being unkind to Milo in a way she had tried to make subtle, and he did it without drama, just a quiet that wasn't fair that Sophie received and sat with, and eventually, in her own time, corrected. Sophie did not soften in any dramatic way. She was still Sophie, precise, guarded, prone to silences and strong opinions. But she laughed sometimes now during the sessions, usually at something Milo did. And she had started, Elowen noticed, playing piano by herself between sessions, in the evening when she thought no one was listening. Nothing complex. Just the patterns Ronan had shown her, repeated and varied and repeated again. The way you work at something you have decided belongs to you. It was in the third week that Elowen started digging. She told herself it was professional habit. She had a responsibility to know who was spending time with her daughter. She had people who could access things her own initial search had not reached, and she used them now, carefully, requesting the unsealed portions of Ronan's service record through a channel that had helped her navigate similar situations before. What came back was more than she had expected. The operation was not named in the documents. Names had been stripped, as had most geographic specifics, but the shape of it was there. A maritime extraction in contested waters 3 years before Ronan's separation. The mission objective had been the recovery of specific intelligence assets. During the approach, Ronan's unit had encountered a separate situation, a group of civilians trapped on a vessel that had been disabled by the same actors they were surveilling. The orders from command had been to continue the primary objective without engagement. The civilians were, in the official language of the redacted document, outside mission parameters. Ronan had deviated. He had divided his unit, completed the primary objective with a reduced team, and used the remainder to extract the civilians' 11 people, including 4 children from the disabled vessel under conditions the report described as extreme and unauthorized. Everyone had survived. The intelligence objective had also been achieved, though with compromised timing that had created downstream complications that were detailed in 2 attached pages that made Elowen's stomach tighten as she read them. The review board had, in the end, declined to pursue formal disciplinary action, partly because the mission objective had been met, and partly because the political implications of the alternative were apparently complicated. The notation on his file was permanent, and the relationship between Ronan Cade and the command structure that governed his world had been, after that, simply over. He had left. Not pushed, exactly. Not fired. He had simply concluded, Elowen understood, that he could no longer operate within a structure that had told him to leave 11 people to die and considered that a reasonable order. She sat with this information for a long time. She did not bring it up with him. Not because she was trying to hide that she had found it, she suspected he knew she was the kind of person who would look, but because she had not yet decided what she wanted to say. The information had changed something in her understanding of him, and she needed to know what it had changed before she opened her mouth. What she understood sitting alone in her office at 10 p.m. with the documents on her screen was this. Ronan Cade had made a choice, in a high-stakes situation, that prioritized the lives of strangers over his own career and over the structure that had organized his entire adult life. He had known probably what it would cost him. He had done it anyway. She thought about the 11 people on that vessel, 4 children. She thought about Milo in a clip-on tie. She thought, he doesn't make choices because they're convenient. He makes them because he thinks they're right, and then he lives with them. She thought about herself, about every compromise she had made, every careful calculation, every moment she had chosen the smart move over the right one, because the smart move protected the thing she had built. Closed the documents. She sat in the quiet of her empty office and did not examine the feeling that was settling in her chest too closely, because she already knew what it was, and she was not ready. The end of the month arrived, and with it the conversation Ronan had said they would have. Came on a Tuesday without Milo, who was at a neighbor's. Sophie had gone to her room after the session, which had been a good one. She was progressing, in the way that felt real rather than performed, messy and genuine and hers. The music room was quiet. Elowen had poured 2 cups of coffee in the kitchen and brought them out, which felt, as she did it, like the most domestic thing she had done in years. Ronan was standing by the window, looking at the river. Turned when she came in, so she said. She handed him the mug. So, he said. He looked at it for a moment. She's doing well.
I know.
It's not just mechanics. She's starting to hear it. The way the pieces relate to each other. That's usually what takes longest. What do you want to do? Elowen asked. He was quiet. He drank the coffee. Outside, a barge was moving slowly down the river, its running lights just visible in the late afternoon gray. I want to keep going, he said. If that's what she wants. It's what she wants. Okay. He paused. I'm not going to take what you offered the first time. I know, she said. We can talk about what's fair. He nodded. He looked at the river for another moment. Your daughter told me something last week, he said. At the end of the session, when I was packing up. She came over and she said, he paused, and something moved briefly across his face. My mom thinks you're different. She's right, but she won't say so herself. Elowen stared at him. 8 years old, he said. I know. Elowen looked away. I'm going to have a word with her about that. Don't, he said. She was right. The word sat in the room for a moment. Elowen did not look back at him immediately. She looked at the river, and the barge, and the fading light on the water. This is complicated, she said. Yes, he agreed. He did not make it simpler. He did not offer anything that would make it easier to dismiss. He just acknowledged it. The way he acknowledged most things without embellishment, without softening, without pretending it was something other than what it was. Elowen looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything else about it that evening. But something had been named, in the quiet way that real things sometimes get named, not with announcement or resolution, but with the simple acknowledgement that they exist, and that both people in the room know it, and that they are going to have to decide, eventually, what to do about them. Milo needed picking up at 7. Ronan finished the coffee and put on his jacket and said he'd see them Saturday. Elowen walked him to the door. Sophie appeared in the hallway, in her pajamas, an hour earlier than usual, and said goodnight to Ronan with a formality that was entirely unconvincing, given that she was wearing socks with penguins on them. "Good night, Sophie," Ronan said, with the same gravity. The door closed. Sophie looked at Elowen. "He's coming back Saturday," Elowen said. Sophie turned and went back down the hall toward her room. "Good," she said, over her shoulder. "I've been working on something I want to show him." Her door closed. Elowen stood in the hallway of her apartment in the sudden quiet, with the empty coffee mugs in her hand and the sound of a barge horn somewhere outside, and the warm, specific weight of a feeling she had not felt in so long that she had genuinely stopped expecting to feel it again. She stood there for a long moment. Then she went to the kitchen, and she washed the mugs, and she did not let herself think too carefully about the fact that she had bought 2 cups of coffee without being asked, and that she had known, without being told, how he took it. The second month was different from the first, in ways that were difficult to articulate, but easy to feel. The first month had carried the particular tension of something provisional, a trial arrangement, a careful extended hand, both parties holding something back because they had not yet decided how much trust to offer. The second month didn't have that quality. The sessions had settled into a rhythm. Ronan arrived, played, taught, and stayed for dinner with the unhurried ease of a man who had stopped treating someone else's apartment like a place he might have to leave quickly. Milo had a favorite spot on Sophie's couch-left cushion, closest to the window, and had started keeping a paperback there between visits, because Sophie had told him he could, and because it was simpler than carrying it back and forth. Elowen noticed these accumulations, the small sediment of shared life that gathered when people stopped being careful with each other. Coffee mug Ronan used that had migrated to the front of the cabinet. A drawing Milo had made for Sophie that she had, without comment, taped to the inside of her bedroom door where she could see it, but where it was not, technically, on display. The way the 4 of them occupied the same space without negotiating the logistics of it, who sat where, who talked when, who needed quiet, and who needed noise because they had all, without deciding to, figured each other out. She was falling for him. She knew it with the same clarity she brought to everything she did not want to acknowledge, sharp, exact, and carefully set to one side while she went on functioning. She had been in exactly one serious relationship in her adult life, before Sophie, and it had ended in the way she already knew about. Since then, she had made a series of pragmatic calculations about what she had room for and what she did not, and the calculations had always come out the same. Company needed her full attention. Sophie needed her full attention. She was one person, and there was not, she had concluded, a version of her life in which she could also be fully present to another person without something important suffering for it. Ronan had not at any point asked her to reconsider these calculations. He had simply been, with consistency and without performance, the kind of person who made them feel less final. She did not tell him this. She was not sure she would have known how. What she did instead was what she always did with things she wasn't ready to address directly. She worked. January was brutal. 3 major client renewals, a regulatory compliance audit that had surfaced 2 problems she'd known were coming, and one she hadn't, and a product demonstration for the board of directors that had been rescheduled twice and was now locked in for the first week of February. Hart Systems was unveiling an updated infrastructure security platform, the most significant technical release the company had made in 3 years, and Bastian Crow, her COO, had been managing the logistics of the demonstration with the thorough competence that had made him, over 6 years, the organizational spine of everything she had built. She trusted Bastian the way she trusted the building she worked in, not warmly, not personally, but with the assumption of structural reliability. He was precise and demanding and occasionally politically difficult, but he was good at his job, and she had never had reason to question his fundamental alignment with the company's interests. She would think about that later, about the particular danger of trusting the things that have always held. The alert came on a Wednesday morning in the last week of January, 3 days before the board demonstration. Elowen was in a client call when her head of security, A careful woman named Petra Moss, who did not interrupt things unnecessarily, sent a message flagged urgent. Elowen excused herself, stepped out of the conference room, and took the call in the hallway. "We have an anomaly," Petra said. She had the voice of someone who chose words with deliberate restraint. Internal access log shows a credential sweep through 3 restricted directories between 2 and 4A. Last night. The credentials used belong to a consultant access account. Which account? A pause. The account registered to Ronan Cade. Elowen stood in the hallway of her own company and felt something cold move through her that she recognized, immediately and with precision, as the sensation of a foundation shifting. "That's not possible," she said. "The log is clear," Petra said. "I'm not telling you what it means. I'm telling you what it shows. Ronan doesn't have internal access. He was issued a limited consultant credential in January when you added him to the building's visitor system. It was a standard administrative extension, gives access to the visitor portal and the scheduling system. Should not have reached the restricted directories. But whoever used this credential knew how to escalate it." Elowen said nothing. "There's more," Petra said. "The access directories contain proprietary elements of the new platform. Architecture, access protocols, some of the behavioral modeling that took 18 months to develop." She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. "Lock the account," she said. "Full audit. I want to know every access point going back 60 days. Don't talk to anyone else about this until I've spoken with Bastian." Bastian Crow's office was on the same floor as Elowen's, at the opposite end of the building, and he was standing when she walked in, which meant he already knew. He had a way of knowing things before she told him that she had for years considered a mark of his competence. "You've seen the log," she said. "Petra briefed me 20 minutes ago." He closed the door behind her. He was a tall man, mid-40s, silver at the temples, with the particular bearing of someone who had spent a long time being the most organized person in any room. "I've also been looking at something else." He turned his monitor toward her. "Military records that have been circulating in the past 48 hours. Not published, not yet, but moving through certain press channels. Flagged as incoming." She looked at the monitor. Fragments of Ronan's service record. Not the full document she had accessed through her own channels, but specific pieces of the deviation, review board findings, the administrative notations written in a framing that made them look not like the record of a man who had saved 11 lives, but like the record of a man with a documented pattern of disregarding authority, manipulating outcomes, and operating outside sanctioned boundaries. "Where did this come from?" she said. "I don't know yet," Bastian said. "But it's being positioned as a story about heart systems and a security risk with direct physical access to our leadership." He paused. "Elowen, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly." "Go ahead. How much access does this man actually have? Not just the credential, physically. To you, to Sophie, to information you discuss in your home." She looked at him. "How much?" Bastian said carefully. "Did you tell him about the February demonstration?" "The room was very quiet. I mentioned it," she said. "Generally. Not the technical specifics." "Did he ask about it?" She thought back. She reviewed conversations with the precision she brought to important things, scanning for the moment that would look, in retrospect, like something it hadn't looked like at the time. She could not find it. There had been no questions about the platform, no interest in her work, beyond the normal interest of someone listening to another person talk about their day. "No," she said, "he didn't ask." "People don't always ask," Bastian said. "Sometimes they just listen, and you talk." She wanted to push back on this. She wanted to say that she was not the kind of person who disclosed sensitive information casually, that she had been building and protecting proprietary technology for a decade, and she knew how to be careful. Both things were true, and yet she thought about the dinners, the conversations, the particular quality of being heard by someone who was genuinely paying attention. The way she had, over the past 2 months, let her guard down with a thoroughness she had not permitted herself in years. "I need to investigate this before I do anything else," she said. "Of course," Bastian said. He said it the way people say, of course, when they have already decided what the answer is. "But Elowen, until the investigation is complete, you cannot have him in your home. Cannot have him near Sophie. You understand that." She understood it. She did not want to. She called Ronan that evening. She had spent 4 hours reviewing the security logs herself, reading Petra's preliminary analysis, and trying to find an alternative explanation with the focused desperation of someone who already knows what the most likely explanation is and is looking for an exit. She did not find one. He picked up on the second ring. "There's a situation," she said. "A security issue at the company. Can't give you the details, but I need you to understand that until it's resolved, I need to pause the lessons." The silence on the line was the particular silence of someone who has heard more in what wasn't said than in what was. "Okay," he said. "It's not." She stopped. She was standing in her kitchen at the window, looking at the city that spread out below her in the dark. "I'm not accusing you of anything. You don't have to explain it. Ronan Elowen." His voice was even, the same even tone he used when Sophie made a mistake at the piano, not cold, not hard, just steady. "If there's an investigation and my name is attached to it in some way, then you're doing exactly what you should do. I'm not going to be angry with you for it." She stopped again. She had expected him to push back. She had expected him to ask what the evidence was, defend himself, to be angry, to be hurt in the particular vocal way that hurt men often were. She had prepared for all of those responses. She had not prepared for this one. "Sophie's going to be upset," she said. "I know." A pause. Will you tell her it's temporary? Not a specific reason. Just that it's a pause." "I'll tell her," Elowen said. Another silence. "Take care of it," he said. "Call me when it's done." He hung up. She stood at the window for a long time after. Sophie took it the way Sophie took things she hadn't been given adequate information about, and therefore couldn't process. She went quiet, and stayed quiet. And the quality of the quiet was the specific heavy kind that meant something was building underneath it. "Why?" she said finally. At dinner, 2 days after Elowen had told her. "There's something at work I need to figure out. It's temporary." "What kind of something?" "A work problem." "Does it have to do with Ronan?" Elowen looked at her daughter across the table. 8 years old, she thought. 8 years old and already too perceptive for half-truths. "I can't talk about it, Sophie." "That means yes." "It means I can't talk about it." Sophie was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her plate, then back up. "He didn't do anything wrong," she said. "I don't know that yet." "I do," Sophie said, with a certainty that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with the kind of knowing that is not analytical but animal, the deep reading of a child who has spent her whole life studying people carefully. Because she could not afford to be wrong about them. Elowen looked at her. "Sophie, 7 teachers," Sophie said. 7. I knew every single one of them wasn't right. In the first session. Before the end of it. She picked up her fork. "I know when someone is pretending. He wasn't." She ate. She didn't say anything else about it, but Elowen sat with it. Ronan, meanwhile, was not waiting. He had not been asked to investigate. He had been asked, essentially, to stay away and let it resolve, which was what he had agreed to on the phone. He was good at following reasonable requests. He was also, and had been for most of his adult life, someone who had a difficult time tolerating a situation in which the wrong conclusion was being moved toward, and he could see it, and had the capacity to intervene. He spent the first day processing the shape of what Elowen hadn't told him. She had said security issue and your name in the same sentence, and she had said it the way people say things they wish weren't true. The credential was the obvious entry point he had been issued building access. He remembered the administrative email. He had used it exactly once to check in at the front desk because his phone had been dead and the guard needed the confirmation code. He hadn't thought about it since. He started, not with the technical questions, because he didn't have access to the technical evidence, but with what he could access, the pattern. Someone had used his credential to access restricted files days before a major product demonstration. The credential escalation Elowen had described carefully, without meaning to give away as much as she did, required someone who knew the system. Not an outside actor probing blindly. Someone who knew how the administrative credentials were structured and how to move through them. That kind of knowledge didn't come from him. He worked on boats. He was not, had never been, a hacker. Whatever he had done in his previous life, it had been physical and operational, and very far from corporate cybersecurity architecture. So either the evidence was fabricated, or someone had used his credential specifically because it was available and peripheral enough to look like it came from outside the company's regular structure. He thought about who had access to the building's visitor credential system. He thought about who would know that Ronan Cade's name was attached to one. The answer to both questions pointed in the same direction. He didn't have access to Hart's system's internal records. He couldn't pull logs or audit trails. What he could do was the thing his training had actually been about, which was not technology, it was people. It was watching how they moved and what they protected and where they put their energy when they thought they were not observed. He had been inside that building enough times to notice things. He had noticed them the way he noticed everything, without particularly trying, because attention to environment had been operational survival for too long to turn off. Bastian Crow had not liked him from the first time Ronan had encountered him in the building's lobby, 3 weeks into the sessions. It had been a brief interaction, Bastian on his way out, Ronan on his way in, the introduction polite and cool and over in 90 seconds. But Ronan had read something in those 90 seconds that he had filed away without knowing why, the way the man's attention had sharpened when Ronan gave his name. The very slight recalibration of his expression. The pause before his hand extended, called a contact. Not a current one, someone from his previous life who had transitioned into private sector security consulting and who owed him, in the informal accounting of significant favors, more than a few hours of careful inquiry. "I need you to look at something for me," he said, off the record completely. "I need to know about the financial structure of a company called Hart Systems, not the public filing the board relationships. Equity positions. Anything that's positioned quietly. That's specific," his contact said. "Yes. How specific do you need it?" "I need to know if anyone inside the company is positioned to benefit from a leadership change." What came back over the following 72 hours was careful and partial and enough. Bastian Crow had, over the previous 14 months, acquired a secondary equity position in a firm called Viridian Tactical, a cybersecurity competitor that had been making quiet moves in the infrastructure protection space. The acquisition was not illegal on its face, but it was the kind of arrangement that existed in the gray area between personal investment and conflict of interest, and it had not been disclosed to Hart Systems Board, which was the kind of omission that transformed gray areas into very dark ones very quickly. Viridian's most recent funding round, Ronan's contact noted with the careful flatness of someone delivering information they found significant, had been conditional on the acquisition of proprietary behavioral modeling technology. The kind of technology that had been under development at Hart Systems for 18 months. Ronan sat with this for a long time. He thought about the timing, the February demonstration, the alert coming 3 days before it. The way the evidence, his credential, the leaked military records had been arranged to create a story that pointed outward, that made the breach look like an infiltration rather than an inside job. Thought about Elowen, who had spent 6 years trusting the man who had spent those 6 years waiting for the right moment to take from her the thing she had built. He needed to get this information to her. He needed to do it in a way that she would actually hear, which was complicated by the fact that he was currently, from her perspective, a suspect, and anything he brought to her door would read, at least initially, as a man trying to defend himself by pointing at someone else. He wrote it out. All of it. The equity position, the connection to Viridian, the timeline, the pattern. He wrote it with the precision he had once used for operational briefs. No emotion, no argument, just the facts in the order they occurred and the connections between them. He put it in an envelope. He didn't send it to Elowen. He sent it to Petra Moss. He had met Petra once, briefly, in the building lobby, and she had struck him as someone who evaluated evidence rather than assumed conclusions. He included a cover note that said only, "I don't expect you to take this at face value. I'm asking you to verify it. The timeline matters." Then he went back to work. He went to the boatyard. He picked Milo up at 3:15. He cooked dinner and did the bath and bed routine, and sat in the quiet of his apartment afterward, and he thought about Sophie's, who had been without piano lessons for a week, and about Elowen, who was carrying something very heavy and didn't know yet that the ground under it was not what she thought. He thought about what it cost to trust someone, and how rarely people counted the cost correctly until the moment they found out whether or not they'd been right. Petra Moss took 4 days. She was careful and thorough, and she did not tell Bastian she was looking, which was the correct decision for a woman in her position who had received an anonymous package and had no way of knowing yet who to trust inside her own organization. She pulled records through channels that did not intersect with Bastian's operational visibility. She verified the Viridian equity position through a securities database that the company's internal system didn't touch. She brought her findings to Elowen on a Thursday morning, without announcement, and closed the office door behind her. Elowen read the documents without speaking. She read them twice. "How long have you been looking at this?" she said. 4 days. Who else knows? No one. Not yet. Elowen looked up. Where did this start? What flagged it? Petra hesitated for a fraction of a second. I received information, she said carefully, from outside the company. I verified everything independently before bringing it to you. Every single element in that folder has been confirmed through sources that don't run through Bastien's office. Outside the company, Elowen said. She looked at the folder. She looked at Petra Ronan. Petra didn't answer. She didn't need to. Elowen sat back in her chair. She felt something that was not quite relief and not quite grief, something that sat uncomfortably in between, in the specific space where you realize that the thing you feared was wrong and the thing you hoped was right were both true simultaneously, and that the cost of the journey between them was not recoverable. She had sent him away. She had told him, carefully and carefully not accusing him, that his name was attached to a security breach, and he had said okay and hung up, and instead of defending himself or being angry or asking her to explain what she thought he'd done, he had quietly started pulling on the actual thread. He had solved it, she thought, without being asked. Without the resources of the company or the authority of her position or any of the things she would have used. He had solved it the way he had apparently solved most things that mattered to him, by paying attention, following the logic, and refusing to stop until he had something real. And then he had sent it to Petra instead of her, because he had known she wasn't ready to hear it from him directly. Because he had understood, without being told, the most useful thing he could do was put the truth somewhere it could be verified before it reached her. Pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. Then she dropped her hands. I need to get the board on a call, she said. Today, I need outside legal counsel on the line, and I need the board to be looking at this before Bastien knows we're looking. She stood. And I need the demonstration postponed. Not canceled, postponed. 48 hours. I'll start making the calls, Petra said. She moved toward the door. Petra. She stopped. The information that came from outside. Did he say anything else? Any message? Petra turned back. The note said, I don't expect you to take this at face value. I'm asking you to verify it. The timeline matters. Elowen absorbed this. That's all, Petra said. Yes, Elowen said. That sounds right. She called him that night. It was nearly 11. She had spent 12 hours in crisis management board calls, legal consultation, the careful choreography of documenting everything before any confrontation, because confronting Bastien before the documentation was complete would have given him time to move assets and muddy the trail. Ronan picked up on the second ring. Again, I know, she said. She didn't say what she knew. She didn't explain the sequence of events, or what Petra had found, or what she had spent the day doing. She just said, I know. He was quiet. I'm sorry, she said. Came out differently than she intended, not the professional apology, the one she deployed when she had made an error in a negotiation or a calculation. This came out like something she meant in the place where she kept things she meant. You did what you should have done, he said. Given what you had, I did what was defensible. That's not always the same thing. He let that sit. How's Sophie, he said. Angry, Elowen said. Quiet angry, which is worse. She'll be okay, I know. Elowen was standing at the window again. The city below, the same spread of light and dark. She told me she knew you didn't do anything wrong. The night I told her. She's a perceptive kid, he said. She said she could tell. From the first session. A pause. She was right. Ronan said nothing. He had a quality in silence that she had come to read with some accuracy. This one was not uncomfortable. This was a man sitting with something that he was not going to make small by saying the wrong thing about it. I need to deal with Bastien, she said. Legally, formally. It's going to take a few days. Maybe more, I know. After that, she stopped. After that, he said, we'll talk. She wanted to say more. She had the words. Approximately, she knew the shape of what she wanted to tell him, had known it for weeks, and it was no easier to find the right opening now than it had been then. But there was still a crisis on the other side of her, and Bastien had not yet been confronted, and the demonstration had not yet been rescheduled, and she was standing in the wreckage of a trust she had extended to the wrong person for 6 years. And she was not right now, in the right state, to say the things that needed to be said carefully. Ronan. Yeah, Saturday. She took a breath. If Sophie asks and she will ask, tell Milo the lessons are back on Saturday. Pause. Okay, he said. Not are you sure or we don't have to, or any of the comfortable hedging that would have let them both pretend it was simpler than it was. Just okay. The same single word he had used in the diner when they had reached an agreement, and she understood it meant the same thing now. A thing had been settled, and that was that. She stood at the window for a long time after. Below her, the city moved with its usual indifference traffic, lights, the ordinary business of people going places and coming back. The building around her was quiet. The company she had built from 3 employees and a server room that smelled like mildew was intact. And the man who had been taking it apart had not yet been told that she knew. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she would begin dismantling what Bastien had built in the shadows of the thing she trusted. But tonight she stood at the window and she thought about a man in a dark suit playing piano in a quiet corner, and about a small girl who had walked toward him without hesitation, and about the particular reliability of knowing someone, not the version you have researched or calculated or risk-assessed, but the actual person who shows up the same way every time, who tells you the truth and waits for you to be ready to hear it, and who sends his evidence to a third party because he understands, without explanation, that this is what the situation needs. She pressed her hand briefly against the cold glass. She thought Sophie was right from the beginning. She thought she usually is. Somewhere in the building's lower floors, her security team was building the legal case that would end Bastien Crow's career tomorrow. In a quiet apartment by the waterfront, a man she had sent away was probably asleep, or close to it, with a 7-year-old in a bedroom down the hall, and a life that did not look like much from the outside, but that was, she now understood, built entirely out of choices he had made on purpose. She finally stepped back from the window. She had work to do. The confrontation with Bastien happened on a Friday. Elowen had spent 2 days building the case with outside legal counsel, a firm that had no prior relationship with Hart Systems, and therefore no exposure to whatever internal loyalties Bastien had cultivated over 6 years. She had been careful in the way she was careful about things that mattered, methodical, documented, nothing verbal that couldn't be verified, no confrontation before the record was complete. The board had been briefed in a call that Bastien had not been invited to, and the 3 members she trusted most had given her what she needed: authority to act, legal coverage for the actions she intended to take, and the presence of 2 of them, in person, in the conference room when she walked in. Bastien had been told the meeting was about the rescheduled demonstration logistics. He arrived on time, which he always did, with a tablet and a prepared agenda, and he had time to look at the 2 board members before he understood that the agenda was not the one he had prepared for. Elowen had run difficult meetings before. She had fired people, ended partnerships, delivered findings that destroyed professional relationships, and occasionally personal ones. She did not enjoy any of it, and she was good at all of it, which was one of the persistent ironies of the life she had built. She laid out the evidence in order: equity position, timeline, the credential manipulation, the leaked military records and the press contacts who had received them, connection to Viridian's funding conditions. She spoke for 22 minutes and did not raise her voice and did not use a single word that was not in the documented record. Bastien tried 3 things in sequence. He tried denial, briefly, until she showed him the securities database confirmation. He tried contextualization the equity position was personal, unrelated, a misunderstanding of the disclosure requirements, until the board member on her right read aloud from the company's conflict of interest policy, which Bastien had signed. Then he went quiet, and the quality of the quiet was the quality of a man who is calculating, rapidly, what the least damaging path forward looks like. "You should call your attorney," Elowen said, "before you say anything else." He looked at her. 6 years, she thought. 6 years of standing next to each other in this building, of building something together, of her trusting the structure without looking at what was underneath it. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Call your attorney, Bastien." He left with the company's general counsel and 2 members of building security, and Elowen sat in the conference room after everyone else had filed out, and she put her hands flat on the table and she breathed. She was not shaking. She was very tired in the specific way that follows sustained precision, the exhaustion of having held everything exactly right for a long time, and now being in the first moment where she could set it down. She thought about Ronan's note to Petra: "I'm asking you to verify it. The timeline matters," she thought. It does. Picked up her phone and sent him a single text. "It's done. He's out." He wrote back 20 minutes later, "Good." And then, after a pause, "Saturday still?" She actually smiled, alone in a conference room, with the remains of a crisis spread across the table in front of her. "Saturday still," she wrote. Saturday arrived with the complicated relief of something that has been anticipated long enough to lose its simple shape. Ronan came at 10. Milo had his backpack. Sophie was in the music room when they arrived, already at the piano, which Elowen noted without commenting on, because Sophie had not voluntarily gone near the piano during the 2 weeks Ronan had been absent. She was playing one of the patterns he had shown her, the left-hand foundation, the right hand moving above it, slowly and with the particular concentration she brought to things she was genuinely trying to get right. She didn't stop when they came in. She played it through to the end. Then she turned around. She looked at Ronan for a moment with the flat, direct look she used when she was deciding whether to say what she was thinking. "I practiced," she said, "every day." "I know," he said. He didn't know, technically, but it was clearly true, and he said it the way you acknowledge a fact rather than a surprise. "I was angry," she said, "but I kept practicing." "That's what you do with things you care about," he said. "Keep showing up even when it's hard." Sophie looked at him for another beat. Then she turned back to the piano. "I want to show you what I worked on," she said. He sat beside her on the bench. Elowen went to the kitchen to make coffee she didn't particularly need, because her eyes were doing something she didn't want to happen in front of anyone. Milo appeared at the kitchen doorway. "Do you have the good cereal?" he said. "The one with the little shapes?" "Bottom cabinet," she said. "Behind the oatmeal." He went to find it. She listened to the sound of the piano starting in the next room, and the sound of Milo clattering through her kitchen cabinet, and she stood at the counter and thought that whatever came next, this particular morning had been worth everything it had cost. The weeks that followed were, on the surface, a return to the pattern of before. Tuesday and Saturday sessions, dinners, the gradual accumulation of shared time that had been interrupted and now resumed, with the slight self-consciousness of things that have been interrupted, a little more careful, a little more deliberate, as though both Ronan and Elowen were aware that they had gotten close to losing this and were not taking the resumption for granted. Underneath the surface, things were different. The crisis had moved something. Not dramatically, not in the way crises in stories move things, no sudden declarations, no scenes in the rain. More like a geological shift, slow and significant and felt in the body before it was named. Elowen had trusted the wrong person for 6 years, and the right person not enough for 2 months, and she had watched Ronan respond to being wrongly suspected by quietly solving the problem without being asked, without expectation of credit, without leveraging the situation to extract anything from her. She had watched him do this, and she could not pretend anymore that it was uncomplicated. She stopped pretending. She did not immediately do anything about it. She was a woman who processed things internally over long periods before arriving at conclusions, and Ronan was a man who did not push, and so they existed for several weeks in the particular charged quietness of two people who have understood something about each other and are waiting for the right moment with the patience of adults who have both been hurt by moving too fast. The moment came on a Tuesday evening in March, after Sophie had gone to bed and Milo was asleep on the couch under one of Elowen's blankets. He had been fighting a low-grade cold and had fallen asleep 20 minutes into a movie that nobody was really watching. The apartment was quiet. They were in the kitchen, and Ronan was washing the dishes that had accumulated from dinner because he had started doing this at some point, and it had become, like many things, simply a pattern. "I need to say something to you," Elowen said. He kept washing. "Okay, she stopped. She was standing with her back against the counter, watching him, and she was aware of being in the particular position of someone who has prepared what they want to say and discovered, in the moment of saying it, that the preparation is insufficient. "I've spent a long time making decisions based on what's manageable," she said. "What I can sustain and control and keep running without breaking. Sophie, the company, everything. I got very good at knowing exactly how much room I had and not exceeding it. Turned the water off." He dried his hands on the dish towel and turned around. "You exceeded the room," she said. He looked at her. "I don't know what to do about it," she said, which was honest in the way she was learning. Be honest with him completely, without the management that made honesty comfortable. "I know what I feel. I don't know if the timing is right, or if it's too complicated, or if the kids—" "Elowen," he said. She stopped. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I'm not in a hurry. There's no deadline." He put the dish towel on the counter. "But you should know what you just said." "I already knew. I've known for a while." "And," she said. "And I'm still here," he said. "Washing your dishes on a Tuesday night." She looked at him. He looked back. And the thing that had been building for 4 months simply settled, the way things settle when they finally find their level, not with drama or resolution, just with the quiet rightness of something that has stopped being potential and become actual, crossed the kitchen. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to look at him, and he put one hand along the side of her face, the rough-palmed hand of a man who worked with them, and he just held it there for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Yes," she said. He kissed her. It was not a cinematic moment. The kitchen light was slightly too bright, and somewhere in the living room, Milo made a small sound in his sleep and shifted, and she had dish soap on her sleeve from where she'd leaned against the counter. None of that was cinematic. All of it was real, and the realness of it was exactly what made it what it was. When they stepped back, she was aware of a specific internal state, that she did not have immediate vocabulary for something lighter than relief and quieter than happiness and more durable than either. "You should take Milo home," she said. "He has school." "I know," he said. He did not move immediately. "Ronan, give me a minute," he said. She gave him a minute. March moved into April. The legal proceedings against Bastian Crow advanced with the methodical pace of institutional process, the kind of pace that is frustrating to live alongside, but that Petra Moss assured Elowen was actually fast, relative to what these things usually were. The documentation was solid. The board had engaged a forensic accounting firm that had found additional financial irregularities beyond what Ronan's initial inquiry had surfaced, which extended the scope considerably and made the case more complex, but also, the attorneys said, more complete. There would be no quiet settlement. There would be a reckoning. In the meantime, Elowen rebuilt the COO structure with an interim appointment, someone from inside the company who knew the operations and had the trust of the engineering team. And she postponed the technology demonstration to late spring, by which point the platform would have been independently audited by a firm she selected, with Petra's oversight, specifically for the absence of any Bastian-adjacent relationships. She was busy. She had always been busy. The difference now was that the end of the day had a different quality, not the flat termination of productive hours that had characterized most of her adult life, but something with a shape to it, something she was moving toward rather than simply past. April became May. Sophie's playing evolved, in a way that was difficult to describe to people who weren't in the room for it, not more technically accomplished in the measurable way of someone who has done more scales, but more inhabited. She played with the confidence of someone who had stopped fighting the instrument and started talking to it. Ronan had told her in one of the early sessions that the piano was not a test. She had not believed him then. She believed him now, and the difference was audible. Milo and Sophie had developed, in the way that children sometimes do when they are left largely to manage their own social architecture, a friendship that looked nothing like what adults would have designed for them. They argued regularly about inconsequential things, with a comfort that implied deep security. Sophie helped Milo with reading. Milo, who had a natural gift for spatial reasoning, helped Sophie with the math homework she found boring. They communicated frequently via a messaging app with a grammar and vocabulary that was, as far as Elowen could tell, entirely their own. It was Milo who said, one Saturday afternoon in early May, with the casual delivery of a 7-year-old reporting an observable fact, "I think we should all live together. It would be easier." There was a brief silence in the music room. "Milo," Ronan said. "I'm just saying," Milo said. "Then we wouldn't have to keep going back and forth." He was looking at a section of Sophie's sheet music with an air of complete detachment from any consequences his statement might have produced. Sophie looked at Elowen. Her face had the characteristic careful neutrality it wore when she was managing something she felt strongly about. Elowen looked at Ronan. Ronan looked at the ceiling briefly, with the specific expression of a parent who is caught between the impulse to correct a child and the awareness that the child is not actually wrong. "Let's work on the bridge section," he said to Sophie. Sophie turned back to the piano. Milo went back to the sheet music. And the moment passed into the category of things that had been said and could not be unsaid, and would require, eventually, a conversation between adults. That conversation happened the following week. It was not fully resolved in one sitting, because real things rarely are, but it was begun, and beginning was what mattered. The rescheduled Hart Systems product demonstration was scheduled for the 3rd week of May at Hart Tower. It was a larger event than the original, partly because the postponement had built anticipation in the industry, partly because the story of Bastian's removal had leaked in incomplete and garbled forms that had generated significant press attention, and partly because Elowen had decided, in one of the clearer strategic decisions of her recent career, to use the demonstration not just as a product launch, but as a statement of institutional health. The company was intact. The technology was intact. The leadership was intact. She wanted the room full enough that this would be unambiguous. The demonstration was scheduled for 7 p.m. Guests would include board members, major clients, industry press, and several regulatory contacts whose comfort with Hart Systems practices would have direct implications for a government contract the company was pursuing. 500 people. The building's main presentation hall on the 3rd floor, with a secondary gathering space on the lobby level, and a private client dinner on the 40th floor afterward for the 30 most significant attendees. Ronan and Milo were not on the guest list, which was as it should be. It was a professional event, not a personal one, and whatever the state of things between them, Elowen was not in the practice of blending these categories in public without being ready for what that blending meant. Sophie, however, was there. She had been to 3 previous company events and understood how to conduct herself, and she had been asking to come to this one specifically, without fully explaining why, in the particular way she had when she wanted something. She wasn't ready to argue for directly. Elowen had said yes. They arrived at 6:15. The building was already busy catering, AV technicians, the quiet pre-event machinery of a large corporate evening getting its logistics resolved. Curtis drove them. Elowen's security team was deployed across the building. Sophie wore a dark blue dress she had chosen herself, and the small pearl earrings that had belonged to Elowen's mother, which she had asked to borrow once before, and which Elowen had started thinking of as Sophie's. Everything until 7:43 p.m. went exactly as planned. The first indication was the elevators. Both sets stopped simultaneously, not the gradual failure of a technical issue working through the system, but the immediate building-wide stop of something cut at the source. The lights in the presentation hall flickered and held, which meant the backup generator had engaged. But the building's electronic systems access control, communications routing, security network that managed the doors, went into a failure mode that Elowen had not seen before because it was not a recognized failure mode. It was a cascade. Something had hit the building's control architecture at a level that was not the individual systems, but the integration layer that connected them. Petra was at Elowen's side within 90 seconds. Her face was controlled in the way that faces are controlled when the person behind them is working very hard and does not have time to explain what they are working on. "What is it?" Elowen said quietly. "Network attack," Petra said. "Building automation system. Elevators are locked. The electronic door seals on the upper floors are engaged. Anyone in a sealed space stays sealed until we can override manually or until the system comes back." She paused. "Emergency communications are down. The building's external alert system is not transmitting." 500 people, Elowen said. "I have people manually pulling fire exits on the lower floors. Those are mechanical, they'll open. We can evacuate the lower 3 floors without the building system. Problem is anything above the 4th floor." Sophie, Elowen said. She was in the secondary gathering space on the lobby level, as of my last visual. "Get me a visual now." Petra spoke into her earpiece. Pause. Then a look on her face that Elowen read before she said the words. "She was there," Petra said. "She's not there now." Ronan was not in the building when the attack began. He was at home with Milo, who was already in bed, when his phone showed the building's emergency alert fail not from any internal knowledge, but from the exterior news that began moving through local channels within minutes of the system going down. A Hart Tower event, a systems failure, emergency services responding. He was out the door in under 2 minutes. He called his neighbor, an older woman, reliable, who had watched Milo before as he moved down the stairs, and she answered and said yes before he finished asking. He left the key under the mat and was in his truck before the phone was back in his pocket. He did not call Elowen. She would be in the building, managing the situation, and a call from him would take something from her that she needed for the 500 people in her building. He drove. He arrived at Hart Tower 11 minutes later, which was fast in a way that involved decisions about traffic signals he would not have made under other circumstances. The street outside the building was already blocked by emergency vehicles, 2 fire units, police, an EMS truck. People were moving out of the lobby-level exits in the organized, slightly dazed way of crowds that have been told where to go without being told why. He identified himself to the fire unit's incident commander, not as anything official, but as someone with people inside who knew the building's layout from regular access. The commander was a practical man in an impossible situation. He did not turn away someone who was calm and knew the floor plan. Upper floors are the problem, the commander said. We have manual override keys for the stairwells, but the electronic seals on individual rooms need either power restoration or the building's master override code, which is apparently inside the building system that is currently not operational. Anyone in a sealed room on the upper floors is stuck until we get that system back. How long? We have people on it. Best estimate is 45 minutes to an hour. Ronan thought about this for approximately 3 seconds. Give me an override key for the stairwell access, he said, and tell me where your command post for the upper floors is. He moved through the building with the particular focus that returned to him in situations like this, not urgency in the emotional sense, but a complete narrowing of attention to the immediate problem. Stairwells were clear, the mechanical push bars operated independently of the building system, and the fire units had people moving systematically through each floor, knocking on sealed doors and communicating with people inside, keeping them calm, assessing situations. He found Elowen on the 4th floor, coordinating with a member of her security team. She saw him and something moved across her face, not surprise, exactly. More the specific relief of a person who has been managing something alone and has just been joined by someone competent. Sophie, he said. That was all. She was in the lobby gathering space. She left. Someone saw her heading toward the north elevator bank about 3 minutes before the system went down. If she got in, Elowen stopped. The elevator stopped between floors. If she was in one, she would have been evacuated. She wasn't, which means she wasn't in the elevator. She was near the north bank, he said. What's near the north bank on the lobby level? Access corridor, Elowen said, and the north conference suite. Conference room C is up 1 second floor, north side. Electronic seal? Yes. He looked at her. She would have gone exploring, Elowen said, and the flatness in her voice was the flatness of a parent who knows their child's patterns exactly and is trying not to be terrified by the implications. Does that at events. She finds somewhere quiet. She's been in that conference suite before. Ronan was already moving. The 2nd floor stairwell opened with the override key. The north corridor was dark except for the emergency lighting low red strips along the floor, enough to navigate by. Conference room C was the 3rd door on the left. He could see the seal indicator on the door panel. Red, engaged. He knocked. He said Sophie's name. He pressed his ear against the door, thick, commercial grade, the kind that muffled most sound. Nothing. He knocked again. Nothing. He thought about the room. He thought about what was on the other side of the door, a child in the dark, in an unfamiliar silence, who might be scared or might be very deliberately quiet, because she had heard a knock from a stranger and was doing the sensible thing an 8-year-old in that situation would do, which was wait and not answer. He thought about the piano. He placed his palm flat against the door and he tapped. 3 slow beats, then 2, quick, then 3 slow, the opening rhythm of the first piece he had ever taught her. The pattern they had played together on the first day, the left-hand foundation, the most basic melody, the one she had taken home and practiced until it was hers. He tapped it and waited. From inside the door, very faint, came 2 slow beats and 1 quick. Not exact. She had changed it slightly the way she did when she was improvising, putting her own emphasis on the pattern, making it hers. But it was her. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them. Sophie, he said loudly and clearly. It's Ronan. I'm going to get the door open. Move away from it and sit against the far wall. He waited 10 seconds. Then he went to find the building engineer, who was 2 floors down with a set of manual override cards for the conference suite doors, and who looked at Ronan's expression and moved without being asked to explain the urgency. The door opened. Sophie was against the far wall, exactly where he had told her to be, with her knees pulled up and her phone in her hand. The phone had no signal. She had apparently figured this out quickly, and her face, when the door opened and the corridor light fell on her, had the expression of someone who has been managing something alone and is very glad to be done managing it. I knew that was you, she said. I know, he said. I changed the rhythm, I noticed. She stood up. She crossed the room and she walked into him, not dramatically, not with the full collapse that fear sometimes produces, but with the specific firmness of a child who has held herself together through something hard and is now allowing herself to stop. She pressed her face against his jacket, and he put his hand on the back of her head and held on. "Your mom is on the 4th floor," he said. "We're going to go up." "Okay," Sophie said, her voice slightly muffled. "You did well," he said. "I was scared," she said. She said it with the directness she applied to observable facts. "I know," he said. "That's okay. You did well anyway." They went up the stairwell together, his hand on her shoulder, the emergency lighting making red lines along the floor ahead of them. She walked steadily. She did not cry. When they came through the stairwell door to the 4th floor, Elowen was 15 feet away, and she saw Sophie first, Sophie walking upright, Ronan's hand on her shoulder, and the sound she made was very small and quickly controlled, but Ronan heard it. Sophie crossed the distance and went to her mother, and Elowen held her daughter with the total, uncurated fierceness of a parent who has spent the worst 32 minutes of their recent life in the specific hell of not knowing. Ronan stood back and let them have it. The building system was restored at 9:41 p. M. By 10, all 500 guests had been accounted for. 14 people had sustained minor injuries in the initial disorientation. Nothing serious, nothing permanent. The presentation hall had been evacuated in good order. The 40th floor dinner had been quietly canceled, with Elowen's assistant already sending messages before the all-clear was fully issued. By midnight, investigators had located the physical intrusion point, a device attached to the building's automation infrastructure in a maintenance access panel on the 2nd floor, installed sometime in the previous 72 hours by someone with building access. The device had been set to activate at a specific time. It had been designed to fail in a way that mimicked a known equipment malfunction, while actually executing a deliberate cascade. It took the investigators 4 days to trace the access trail. When they found it, it led back to a building services contractor whose credentials had been accessed through a proxy. A proxy, the forensic team eventually determined, that connected to financial accounts and communication records inside Bastian Crow's network. He had known the investigation was coming. He had known the demonstration was rescheduled and had decided, in whatever calculation he had made in the weeks since his removal, that disruption was better than defeat. Elowen read the investigator's preliminary report in her office on a Thursday morning, with Petra sitting across from her, and she was very still for a long time. "He endangered 500 people," she said. "Yes," Petra said. "He endangered Sophie." "Yes." Elowen set the report down on her desk. She thought about 6 years. She thought about the things she had trusted and the things she had not looked at carefully enough, because looking carefully at the things that held you up was frightening in a way that looking carefully at everything else was not. "What does the federal involvement look like?" she said. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is treating the building attack as a separate charge from the corporate fraud," Petra said. "Cyber interference with building infrastructure systems affecting emergency communications is federal. They're interested." She paused. "They're very interested." "Good," Elowen said. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at the city, which was doing what it always did, which was continuing without regard for what any individual building or company or person was dealing with on any given Thursday. "I want the board briefed today," she said, "and I want outside counsel on the federal coordination. We cooperate fully, we document everything we give them, and we don't do anything without the attorneys in the room." "Understood," Petra said. She left. Elowen sat alone. She thought about a door in a dark corridor. She thought about a child she had not been able to reach, in a sealed room in a failing building, and about a man who had found her not with technology or authority, or any of the resources that Elowen's world ran on, but with the rhythm of a piano lesson. She thought about what it meant that this was what he had reached for. The system, not the tools. The thing they had built together, the three of them, in a small music room on the 14th floor, over the course of months, the shared language that had developed between a man and a difficult little girl who had chosen him. She pulled out her phone. She typed, "She told me you changed the rhythm back to her." He wrote back after a moment. She made it hers. From the first lesson, Elowen typed. Pause. Then yeah. She looked at the response for a moment. Then she put the phone down and went back to work, because there was still a company to run and a legal process to manage and a demonstration to eventually reschedule, and all of those things were real and required her attention. But the work felt different than it had felt for a long time. Not lighter. It was not lighter. It was still large and demanding and full of things that could go wrong. But it felt like something she was doing inside a life that had other things in it now, rather than a life that was the work and not much else. That was different. She had not noticed until now that it had changed. She noticed it now, and she held it briefly, with the same care she held the things she did not want to lose. Then she picked up the phone to call the attorneys, and the morning went on. The federal indictment came down on a Tuesday in late June, 6 weeks after the night Hart Tower went dark. Bastian Crow was charged on 7 counts: corporate fraud, securities violations, unauthorized access to protected computer systems, and 3 counts related to the building attack, the most serious of which carried a potential sentence that his attorneys, according to the legal contacts Elowen's team was monitoring, were not optimistic about. The U.S. Attorney's Office had been thorough, in a way that suggested they had been building toward something larger than one company's internal conspiracy, and the Viridian connection had opened doors into a pattern of conduct that extended beyond Hart Systems into two other technology firms where Bastian had held advisory positions over the previous 4 years. Elowen read the indictment document in full. It took her 40 minutes. Then she set it aside and did not read it again. She had learned, over the course of the spring, that there was a version of this justice she could participate in: the testimony, the documentation, the cooperation with investigators, and a version she could not, which was the version that required her to keep the wound open and fresh in order to feel like she was engaged. She had given the process everything it needed from her. What happened in the courtroom from this point forward was not her work to do. It was the system's work, slow and imperfect and real, and she had to let it be that. What she could do was the work in front of her. The Hart Systems technology demonstration finally happened on the second Friday of July, 6 months after it had originally been scheduled, in the same hall where the first attempt had collapsed into chaos. Elowen had considered changing the venue. She had decided against it. Changing the venue would have implied that the building meant something it didn't mean anymore, that what had happened there had claimed the space. She was not willing to give it that. The hall was full. More full, actually, than the May event had been the industry attention that had gathered around the story of Hart Systems in the previous months, had translated into a level of interest that her marketing team called, with the particular restraint of people trying not to sound too pleased about something that had involved genuine suffering, an extraordinary opportunity. She stood at the podium and looked at 540 faces and said what was true, that the platform they were seeing tonight represented 3 years of work by a team she trusted, built to protect the infrastructure that other people depended on without thinking about it, and that the company standing in front of them tonight had been tested in ways she had not anticipated and had held. She did not mention Bastian by name. There was no reason to. Everyone in the room knew the story in its broad outline, and the details were in the public record for whoever wanted them. And what mattered now was not the story of what had been attempted, but the story of what had survived it. The demonstration ran for 90 minutes. The platform performed. The engineers answered questions with the precision of people who had spent months watching their work be questioned and scrutinized, and were now, finally, allowed to show what it actually did. Petra sat in the front row and looked, for the first time in months, like a woman who had gotten a full night of sleep. Afterward, in the lobby, one of the board members, the older one, the one who had been at Hart Systems since the early days when Elowen was 26, and nobody was sure yet whether she was going to make it, put his hand briefly on her shoulder and said, "You held it together." "Team held it together," she said. "You held the team together," he said. "That's the job." She received this. She did not deflect it, which was new. She was getting better at receiving things without immediately redistributing them. She had changed. She was aware of this in the way you are aware of changes that have happened gradually, not as a dramatic before and after, but as a difference you notice when you compare the present to a point far enough back. She was not softer exactly. She was still the woman who ran a company with the precision of someone who understood that imprecision cost people, still the woman who read contracts before signing them and asked the questions that made people uncomfortable because they needed to be asked. But something in the architecture of her daily life had shifted. She had stopped eating most meals alone. This sounds small. It was not small. For years, the meal had been functional food consumed at a desk or in a car, or in the specific, efficient solitude of a person who had decided that mealtime was not social time, because social time had a cost that she was not always willing to pay. Now dinner happened at a table, with noise and spilled things and conversations that went sideways, in the way conversations do when children are involved. And she was present for all of it, and she did not experience the presence as a cost. Sophie had changed too, in the quieter way that children change not in discrete events, but in the steady revision of who they are becoming. The girl who had sat at the edge of every room, watching, protecting herself with the careful distance of someone who had been let down by enough enthusiasm to distrust it on principle. That girl was still in there, still present in the flat look and the precise speech and the unwillingness to perform feelings she didn't have. But she laughed more now. She initiated more. She had a friend at school, a girl named Cora, who apparently shared her commitment to saying exactly what she thought, and the two of them had developed a friendship built on mutual directness that Elowen found both recognizable and quietly moving. And she played piano. She played in the evenings by herself, with the unself-conscious absorption of someone who has found a private language and is still discovering what it can say. She was not prodigious, she would probably never be, and Ronan had never suggested she should be, which was part of why she trusted what he had given her. She was simply someone for whom music had become a place she could go, and the door to that place had been opened by a man who understood, from his own experience, that this was what it was for. In August, Elowen launched 2 initiatives that had been forming in her mind since the spring, consolidating slowly and then with increasing clarity into something she knew she needed to do. The first was a music access program, not a corporate charity program with a board and a gala and a logo designed by her marketing team, but a direct partnership with 3 schools in lower-income districts in the city, providing instruments, instruction time. And this was the part that had taken her the longest to figure out how to structure paid instructor positions for people who had musical knowledge and needed work but did not have formal teaching credentials. The application process was designed to identify the quality Ronan had described to Sophie, playing like you mean it. Whether you could make a child want to keep going after the first session. She asked Ronan to help design the evaluation criteria. He sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote for 20 minutes, then read back to her what he had. Not a rubric, not a checklist, but a set of questions to ask candidates in the room with an instrument. Whether they could play something for a child who had never heard classical music and make the child want to hear more. Whether when they made a mistake, they stopped or kept going. What they said when they kept going. "You've thought about this," she said. "I had a long time to think about what the good version looked like," he said, by thinking about the bad version. The second initiative was a career transition program for former service members, not the kind that processed people through resume workshops and interview coaching, but the kind that tried to match specific skills and specific experiences to specific roles. It was harder to design. The problems were structural in ways that took months to understand properly, and she hired a director who had done this work before and knew where the standard approaches failed. Ronan consulted on the design without taking a formal role, because he was clear-eyed about what he had capacity for and what he didn't, and she had stopped trying to argue him into things he had already thought through. Both programs were small in their first year. Neither one looked impressive on paper in the way that large corporate initiatives did. She was not interested in impressive on paper. She was interested in whether the children were playing and whether the veterans were working, and those were the things she measured. The Bellwether Grand held its annual charity gala in the first week of November. Exactly 1 year, to the week, from the evening, Sophie had walked across a ballroom and sat down next to a stranger. Elowen had been asked to speak. She had also been asked whether Hart Systems would sponsor a performance segment, and she had said yes. And then she had gone home and told Sophie, who had already known this was coming because Sophie knew most things before they were officially announced. "I want to play," Sophie said. "I know," Elowen said. "That's why I said yes." Sophie was quiet for a moment. She was 9 now, a year older, a year more in possession of herself. "I want to play the piece I wrote," she said. She had been working on a short original composition for 2 months, nothing ambitious. A minute and a half of music built on the foundational patterns Ronan had given her, but shaped by her, structured by her, ending the way she wanted it to end. "Okay," Elowen said. "And I want Milo there, of course. And Ronan." A pause. "Obviously Ronan." "Yes," Elowen said. "Obviously Ronan." Sophie considered her for a moment with the evaluative look. "Are you nervous?" she said. "A little," Elowen said. Sophie nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "You don't have to be," she said. "I've practiced." "I'm not nervous about you," Elowen said. Sophie looked at her for another moment. Then, with the economy of a child who has understood everything and sees no reason to elaborate, "I know," she said, and went back to the music room. The night of the gala, the Steinway in the alcove had been repositioned at the front of the performance area, under better lighting, for the evening's entertainment segment. It was the same piano, or if not precisely the same instrument, the same model, the same make, pulled from the same hotel inventory. Elowen did not know if this was intentional on the part of the event coordinator and did not ask. Sophie stood backstage, which was, practically, the service corridor in a dark green dress she had chosen herself, holding her sheet music even though she had not needed the sheet music in 3 weeks. Milo was standing next to her, wearing a clip-on tie, a different one from last year, slightly less crooked, and the expression of a child who is managing considerable excitement through the suppressive force of sheer willpower. "You're going to be great," he told her. "I know," she said. "I'm just saying. I know, Milo. My dad says you're really good now." Sophie glanced at him. Something softened in her face, not visibly to most people. But Elowen, watching from the side, could see it. "Your dad taught me," she said. "I know. But you did the work." He said this with the complete conviction of someone relaying something he had been told and had simply accepted as true. "That's what he says. You did the work." Sophie looked back at the door that led to the performance area. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I guess I did." Ronan appeared from the direction of the main room, having navigated the crowd with the unassuming efficiency of a man who had long since stopped finding crowds difficult to move through. He stopped next to Sophie and looked at her for a moment. "How are you?" he said. "Ready," she said. "Nervous?" She considered this with the honesty she applied to self-assessment. "A little," she said, "but not about the playing." "What then?" She thought for a moment. "About whether it matters," she said. "Whether they'll hear it, or just listen to it." Ronan was quiet for a moment. Elowen watched him take in what Sophie had said, which was, she thought, a more sophisticated distinction than most adults articulated the difference between the passive act of processing sound and the active act of letting it mean something. "Some of them will hear it," he said. "Not all. That's true every time anyone plays anything. Play it anyway. Because of the ones who hear it," she said. "Because of what it does to you when you play it right," he said. "People who hear it, that's a good thing. But it's not why you play." Sophie absorbed this. She straightened slightly. She put the sheet music in Milo's hands. "Hold this," she said. "Because I don't need it, and I need somewhere to put it." Milo held the sheet music. Sophie looked at Ronan. "Will you come sit up front?" "Yes, and Elowen?" "We'll both be there," Elowen said. Sophie nodded. She turned toward the door. She turned back once. "The piece is for both of you," she said. In the flat, matter-of-fact tone she used for things she had decided were simply true and did not require embellishment. Then she walked out. She played for 1 minute and 40 seconds. The room did not go immediately quiet. These things never happen immediately. There is always the lag of social momentum, conversations completing themselves, glasses being set down, but it went quiet, and then it stayed quiet, with the particular quality of quiet that a room finds when something unexpected is happening, and people have stopped waiting for it to end. It was not a perfect performance. She rushed one of the middle transitions, and there was a brief hesitation before the final section where she had to find her place again, and anyone with significant musical training would have heard both. None of that mattered. What she played was hers, genuinely and completely hers, built from the foundation a man had given her, and shaped by everything she had done with it since, and it landed with the weight of something made with actual intention. When she finished, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Then she stood, and she did something that no one, including Elowen, had expected. She looked out at the room and she said, clearly enough to carry, "I want Milo to play with me." Milo, who was standing at the side of the performance area, went very still. "He knows the pattern," Sophie said to the room, with complete composure. "We've been practicing." This was news to Elowen. She looked at Ronan. Ronan's expression suggested this was news to him as well, which she found, in the specific context of this moment, the most human and reassuring thing she had seen all evening. Milo walked to the piano. His clip-on tie had migrated approximately 40 degrees from its original position. He sat down next to Sophie. She showed him where to put his hands. She counted quietly, 1, 2, 3, and they played the pattern together. The left-hand foundation, simple and steady, while Sophie's right hand moved above it, finding the melody. Milo's part was basic. He played it with the careful, concentrated effort of a 7-year-old doing something for the first time in public, and he did not mess it up. And when it ended, he looked at Sophie with an expression of pure, uncomplicated relief. Sophie looked back at him. She smiled. Not the managed, self-conscious smile of a child performing the real one, the one that was rare and therefore worth something. The room applauded. Sophie stood and gestured toward the side of the room, toward Ronan and Elowen, standing together with the straightforward expectation of a child who has decided something will happen and is simply indicating when. "Come on," she said. Ronan looked at Elowen. "She's not going to stop until we go up there," Elowen said. "No," he agreed. They went up together. Ronan sat at the piano. Elowen stood slightly to the side because she did not play and was not going to pretend to. And when she said this to Sophie, Sophie said, "I know. You can just stand there. You don't have to do anything," with such matter-of-fact accommodation that Elowen laughed, actually laughed, in the middle of a ballroom full of people, in a way she did not usually laugh in public.
Ronan
Played. He played the same melody he had played a year ago in this room, or something close to it. It was never exactly the same. That was the nature of it, and Sophie joined him. And Milo played his part, and Elowen stood beside them, and did not play a note and was completely present, which was, she had been learning all year, sometimes the most important thing a person could offer. The room watched. Some of them heard it, not all of them. That was true every time anyone played anything. It was enough. They drove home together. All four of them in Elowen's car, a logistical choice that had ceased to be a logistical choice months ago and had become simply the way things were. Milo fell asleep before they reached the highway. Sophie sat beside him, looking out the window, with her characteristic post-event quiet, the interior processing that Elowen had spent years trying to interrupt and had finally learned to leave alone. Ronan was in the front seat. He turned the radio on low, found something without words, left it there. Sophie said, eventually, from the back, "I think they heard it." "Some of them," Ronan said. "More than some," she said. "I could tell." Elowen looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Could?" "When people stop moving," Sophie said. "Not just quiet stop. That's different." Elowen considered this. "When did you figure that out?" "Tonight," Sophie said. "Then no. I already knew. I just didn't have an example before." She went back to the window. Milo breathed steadily beside her. They drove through the November dark, the city giving way to the quieter streets of the neighborhood, the familiar turns that Curtis usually made, but that Elowen was navigating herself tonight, because some evenings you wanted to drive your own car. She thought about a year, what a year could hold if you let it, what could be lost and what could be found in the same span of months, sometimes by the same set of choices. She thought about herself at the beginning of it, standing at a gala window, with sparkling water she hadn't touched, watching a daughter she loved and could not reach, managing everything with a precision that was extraordinary and a loneliness she had long since stopped calling by its name. She was not the same person. She was recognizably herself, still the woman who read contracts and asked difficult questions and ate breakfast in 11 minutes when the morning demanded it. But she was herself inside a life that had other people in it now. People she had not chosen carefully or strategically. People who had arrived through the unpredictable mechanism of a child following a sound across a ballroom. The thing about walls, she thought, is not that they keep you safe. It is that they keep you unchanged. And there is a version of safety that is simply another word for nothing getting in, including the things that would have been worth the trouble. He proposed in December. Not at the piano, that was the story later, that made its way into the small circle of people who knew them well, and that Sophie repeated with proprietary satisfaction whenever it came up. He proposed by the piano. What actually happened was more ordinary. They were in the music room after a late evening session. Just the two of them, the kids were in bed. The apartment was quiet, and Ronan was sitting on the piano bench not playing, just sitting, the way he sometimes sat there when he was thinking through something. Elowen was in the chair near the window with a report she was not reading. She had been not reading it for 20 minutes. "I've been thinking about what Milo said," Ronan said. "Which time?" she said. "Milo said many things in May. About it being easier if we all lived together." She set the report on her knee. "And he was right," Ronan said. "It would be easier. It would also be more complicated," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Both things." He looked at the piano keys. "I'm not asking because it's easier," he said. "I'm asking because it's what I want, and I think it's what you want. And I think Sophie and Milo have already made their decision, and they're waiting for us to catch up." Elowen looked at him. "I don't have a ring," he said. "I didn't. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about the ring question, and I didn't want to assume." "Ronan." "Yeah. Ask the question," she said. He looked at her directly. "Will you marry me?" he said. No preamble, no elaboration. Just the question stated clearly by a man who had decided something and saw no reason to perform the deciding. She had known this was coming, in the way you know things that have been approaching honestly and in plain sight. She had thought about how she would respond, what she would say, whether she would say it with the composure she brought to important things, or whether she would, for once, abandon composure in favor of something more accurate. She said yes. He looked at her for a moment. Then he got up from the bench and crossed the room, and she stood, and he held her the way he held things he did not want to lose, not tightly, not dramatically, just steadily, with the specific quality of someone who has understood that the value of a thing is in the keeping of it. They stood there in the music room for a while. Outside, December was doing what December does, cold and dark and indifferent to the small warm moments happening inside lit windows. Somewhere down the hall, Milo snored faintly, which he did and always had, and which Elowen had found irritating the first time she noticed it, and now found, inexplicably, like the sound of something correctly arranged. "Sophie's going to say she knew," Elowen said eventually. "She did know," Ronan said. "I'm aware," Elowen said. "She's insufferable when she's right. She gets it from somewhere." Elowen pulled back slightly to look at him. "That is a very diplomatic answer." "I'm a diplomatic man," he said. She laughed. He held on. They married in the spring, quietly. Not small, there were people from both sides of their lives, the company world and the waterfront world, and the children insisted on being part of the ceremony in ways that required some negotiation, but without the performance that Elowen had always associated with events of this scale. Sophie wore the pearl earrings. Milo's clip-on tie was, for once, approximately straight, a fact he mentioned to 4 separate people during the reception. There was a piano. Of course there was a piano. Sophie played at the beginning, the same piece she had performed at the gala, and then Ronan played. And then they played together, and Milo sat beside them on the bench being audibly, cheerfully unnecessary, and the people watching them looked the way people look when they are seeing something true and uncomplicated and do not have adequate words for why it moves them. Elowen watched her family and understood that the word was new to her internal vocabulary. Not the concept she had always known what a family was, had built herself and Sophie into a unit that functioned and held. But family as she understood it now was different from family as she had been practicing it. This version required something she had spent years efficiently not doing, which was letting people matter to you in ways you could not control and could not protect yourself from and could not manage back within acceptable parameters. It was, she thought, a significant operational vulnerability. She would not have it any other way. There is a thing people rarely say about the ordinary rescues, the ones that do not make the news and are not recorded in any official account, because they do not involve burning buildings or dramatic interventions, but that are nonetheless the ones that change the trajectory of a life. Child who walks toward a stranger. A man who sits down at a piano because he needs somewhere to put the things that don't fit elsewhere. An 8-year-old girl in a room full of people who have everything, who follows the sound of something real. Nobody chooses these moments. They happen in the gaps between the plans and the 40 minutes between a networking conversation and a formal dinner, in the quarter second when a parent decides not to call their child back from something unfamiliar, because the unfamiliar thing looks, for once, like the right thing. Elowen had spent her adult life believing that she understood risk. She had assessed it and quantified it and built systems to manage it, and she had been good at this, professionally excellent at this, and it had cost her things she had not known she was paying for. She had believed that the controlled life was the safe life, that the walls she maintained were protective rather than simply restrictive, that the loneliness she had renamed independence was a choice rather than an accumulation. Sophie had known differently. Sophie had always known differently. She had sat for 2 years at a piano and refused to play for teachers who were competent and hollow, and had walked across a ballroom without hesitation toward a stranger who played like he meant it, and had been right, with the instinctive, unargued rightness of someone who has not yet learned to distrust their own perception. Children know things. Not everything. Not the complicated. Adult things, the financial things, the legal things, the things that require years of getting it wrong before you understand what right costs. But the person-shaped things, who is real and who is performing, who sees you and who is looking at the idea of you, who will stay and who is already planning the distance. Sophie had known Ronan from the first session. She had known her mother was falling for him before her mother would admit it. She had known, in a sealed conference room in a dark building, that the rhythm on the other side of the door was. His had known it with enough certainty to answer it, to tap back the changed version to say, I hear you. I'm here. That knowledge, the particular intelligence of a child who has been paying attention to people because it was the only currency she trusted, was the thing that had made all the rest of it possible. Not Elowen's competence, not Ronan's capability, not any of the professional structures or legal processes or organizational decisions that had followed. The thing that had started it, and in some real sense had driven all of it, was a 9-year-old girl who trusted what she heard more than what she was told. Piano stayed in the music room on the 14th floor, which was now in a building where 4 people lived instead of 2, and where the furniture had rearranged itself in the gradual, organic way of spaces that are actually inhabited rather than maintained. Milo's books accumulated on shelves they had not previously occupied. Sophie's drawings appeared on walls they had not previously covered. The coffee cabinet reorganized around 2 people's preferences. Sunday mornings became something that required a larger table. Ronan still played in the evenings sometimes, when the building was quiet and the kids were asleep and Elowen was reading or working in the next room. She could hear it through the wall. She had stopped being aware of when she started listening, and when she stopped, because the distinction had dissolved the music, had become part of the ambient fact of the apartment, something she moved through and lived inside, like the particular quality of light that came through the river-facing windows on winter afternoons. She thought about what he had said to Sophie in that first session. The left hand is the foundation. The right hand is the conversation, and the conversation can go anywhere, as long as the foundation stays steady. She had built, for 10 years, a foundation she could control entirely. No variables she hadn't placed there. No weight she hadn't calculated for. It had been technically a very good foundation, and she had stood on it alone and been safe. What she had now was a foundation she had not built alone, and could not control entirely, and had not calculated for, and which held her more steadily than anything she had constructed by herself. This was not a comfortable piece of information. She sat with it the way she sat with important things, directly, without flinching, without making it smaller so it would be easier to hold. It was true. The foundation held, and the conversation went on. That was enough. That was, she had learned, more than enough. That was, in the final accounting of a life, the real accounting, the one you do not submit to any board or any investor or any person whose approval you have spent years learning to need everything.